Morning.
Good morning.
Is the mic okay? Is it good? Okay. Great. Well, this is chapter 1 of the manuscript that I wrote on Galatians. This chapter is called Shift. On the third day, the friends of Christ, coming at daybreak to the place, found the grave empty and the stone rolled away. In varying ways, they realized the new wonder. But even they hardly realized that the world had died in the night. What they were looking at was the first day of a new creation, with a new heaven and a new earth. And in a semblance of the gardener, God walked again in the garden, in the cool not of the evening, but the dawn. That was said by G.K. Chesterton in his book, The Everlasting Man, 1925. Our text for meditation, Galatians chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. Paul, an apostle, sent neither by human commission nor from human authorities, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father who raised him from the dead, and all the members of God's family who are with me, to the churches of Galatia. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself for our sins to set us free from the present evil age, according to the will of our God and Father, to whom be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Part 1, the Alps. For 9 months during the years 2012 and 13, my family enjoyed living in Regensburg, Germany, so that I could serve as an Alexander von Humboldt Research Fellow on the Catholic Theology faculty at the University of Regensburg. No, I'm not Catholic, but that discussion needs to be had some other place than here. During our time in Germany, we had countless interesting cultural exchanges, quote unquote. A few that came to mind are the 1,001 times I tried to order food for my daughter who has food allergies. Entschuldigung, meine Tochter ist allergisch gegen Milchprodukt und Eier. Kann sie diesen haben? Translation, I think. Excuse me, my daughter is allergic to milk products and eggs. Can she have this? Without fail, the person would respond, and usually in English, yes, she can have the fill in the blank with a word such as gelato, bratwurst, Wiener Schnitzel. Most Germans have studied English for 9 years in their educational plan, and almost without fail, I couldn't fool them with my German, due primarily to my lack of good Deutsch grammar and the obvious Southern American accent. Nonetheless, I digress. While we were there in Germany, we also had the opportunity to visit numerous castles, rivers, museums, and best of all, the Alps. We lived in Bavaria, southern Germany, and the German Alps were only about 3 hours away, so we would head down to the mountains from time to time. I remember one weekend when we were in the town of Garmisch-Partenkirchen. We decided to go visit this incredibly beautiful, deep gorge in the mountains. The gorge was over a mile long, at least 400 feet in height, and ranging from 20 feet to 100 feet in width, with nothing but organically shifting stones that faced each other with a rushing river below that was so loud that even when shouting, it was difficult to hear each other. It was simply amazing. The gorge, Park Nachklam, as they call it, was simply unreal. About 100 years ago, some miners were able to dig out a pathway to follow the river. Otherwise, the gorge is impassable to humans. The strength and energy of the water, the sprinkling of the water on your head from above, the darkness of the gorge, the sheer stone, white, twisting walls of the gorge are impressive. Equally interesting for the geologist and all of us were the cutaway views of the rock as one studied it, as if we had taken an orange, cut through it, and were investigating the fibers and the anatomy of the dissected orange, seeing first the peel, then the pulp, and a cutaway of all of the fibers running throughout it. In this case, it looked like a cutaway of one massive layer of stone lying sideways on another layer of stone. The thought crossed my mind, what would it take for one of these stones to slide and shift? The word earthquake immediately came to mind as these massive stones from time to time, do actually shift. Words simply fail to describe the overwhelming feeling of smallness, wonder, amazement that this little boy, myself, feels in the presence of God's magnificent and grandiose creation. It is awesome. Part 2, the Creator. I will sing of your steadfast love, O Lord, forever. With my mouth I will proclaim your faithfulness to all generations. Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? O Lord God of hosts, who is as mighty as you? O Lord, your faithfulness surrounds you. You rule the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, you still them. The heavens are yours. The earth also is yours. The world and all that is in it, you have founded them. You have founded them? Wow. You're kidding, right? That's correct. The psalmist here is praising God, who is bigger, more magnificent, and the designer of everything that we see, even part Naklam. That is simply beyond comprehension. I have a hard time even comprehending the size, magnitude, and beauty of the Alps when I'm sitting in a gorge on a mountaintop, looking out over the lakes and valleys, let alone trying to comprehend the one who designed, made, and sustains these mountains. That's God. Other. I love the fact that within some of our religious circles, the name of God is so revered, so profound, so other, that it cannot, should not, will not be pronounced in speech. He, she is simply Yahweh. I will be who I will be. I will do what I will do. I am who I am. Other. The Creator, other. The magnificent, other. The beloved, other. As I walk through Part Naklam in a sort of trance-like state, in awe of my surroundings, I am compelled to attempt to consider other, Yahweh. And simply imagine that there may be some sort of source, a creative source, who is in divine forethought, conceived of shifting stones, gorges, beauty, and humans admiring it. Incomprehensible. Part 3, King for a Day. To put it lightly, the world was shocked when Pope Benedict stepped out of the role of Pope. How does one assume the position of Vicar of Christ and then set it aside? This concept is not new to us. After all, the very author who penned the letter to the Galations also penned the 2nd chapter of Philippians, where the divine Son left the throne of glory. Nonetheless, how does one set aside such levels of power, glory, and responsibility? The significance of the former Joseph Ratzinger leaving his office can hardly be underestimated when one lives 1 hour from his former home, Munich. In fact, Joseph Ratzinger is an honorary faculty member for the Catholic faculty of the University of Regensburg, where he served as a professor some years ago. My colleague and host at the university, who is the dean of the Catholic faculty, was laughing when he told me, in fact, I'm one of the few people in the world who can claim to be the Pope's boss. Pope Benedict's brother even lives in Regensburg and works with the famous boys' choir here in the city. The Pope stepping aside is a big deal. Now to our text that I have been perusing about, Galations 1:1, the theological thrust of the entire New Testament, the core concept of Christianity, the fulcrum of God's felicity, is found in one small sentence that begins this letter. Paul, an apostle, sent neither by human commission nor from human authorities, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead. Are you seeing it? If you are anything like me, you're probably missing it, other than the fact that I printed the 3 words in bold, which you can't see. That's right, I'm trying to emphasize God the Father. Why is this such a big deal? From your and my point of view, this is old hat and hardly even worth mentioning, but at the time it was significant. The Apostle Paul is writing a letter where a new concept was being tried out on his readers. God the Father, who raised him from the dead. When speaking of earliest Christianity, there's very little that is unique to Christianity. We learn from Rabbinic Judaism that many within Judaism realized that one could fail God through not fulfilling the requirements of the law. From Qumran, we learn that some of the Jews, even in the most stringent cultic settings, believe that God could justify humanity even when we fall short. Even God, who is so faithful to Israel, would come down and bring his merciful hand into the presence of Israel to bring out the justice he required through his loving, merciful hand. Even these ideas were not new. What was unique about Paul's statement was that God chose to justify humanity through his Son. I am trying to emphasize that salvation was being conceived of for humanity through the shift in roles that God was undertaking. Yahweh was being defined by Paul as Father to the Son. The most obvious definition for God in Paul's mind was not that God is Creator, as so many prolific, inspired individuals have concluded for generations before in the history of Israel. It was not Yahweh the Creator, the Sustainer, the one who made covenant with Israel or Abraham. It was in Paul's mind God who redefined his role. Part, 4, God the Creator becomes God the Procreator. I am not suggesting that Jesus was created. I am emphasizing the creative process that was undertaken for God to actually shift the single most important characteristic of himself in relation to the cosmos to relating himself to himself. Just imagine for a moment what it must feel like for Joseph Ratzinger to become Pope Benedict. Even harder, imagine what it means for Pope Benedict to go back to being Joseph Ratzinger. Steps of regression in life are almost impossible to accept by most of us. I remember when we sold the house that I had built with my own hands. I laid the foundation, framed the structure, put a roof on it, did the electrical, the plumbing, the sheetrock, etc. It was, quote, my creation. I remember the day we sold it, and everything that had defined me about that location, that space was no longer mine. I could no longer define myself by that space, by that place. Benedict gave up his place. God gave up his place. Part 5, tectonic shifts. To describe the shift in thought required to imagine Yahweh as Father instead of Creator is massive, to say the least. But yet it is pivotal for a proper understanding of Paul's letter to the Galatians, and for that matter, for understanding the New Testament. It is not a shift that is taken easily, yet the path to understanding this concept is one that comes naturally. To understand this idea, think with me for a moment. First, in the beginning, God creates everything. Genesis 1 and 2. And then retold over and over again throughout the Torah and the rest of the Scriptures. In this process, all of the meticulous, earth-defining events that take place. And suddenly there is a massive cosmos ranging from me to you, to the Alps, to the Atlantic Ocean, to the moon, to the solar system, even to other galaxies and beyond. And all of it is Yahweh's defining moment and identifying marker as it all relates to God. Here, images of God as a graphic designer emerge, putting on the finishing touches to a stop-motion production, or an artist finally placing the Kolinsky sable-haired rigger brush up to the canvas and making the last final touches to a painting that has been in process for 14 years. This is God after the creation, and we are the audience admiring the voluptuous and exquisite production. Then all of a sudden, one stops, and beholds a meteor of ginormous proportions hurling towards the earth. The striking of the earth with this meteor is, without a doubt, going to lead to one clear conclusion. This meteor will be the undoing of everything that God has made. The creation undone. But as the meteor strikes, the creation is not undone, but rather it is redone. The meteor is God Himself coming to redefine the cosmos, to reposition, to stop the sun, and reset the timing belt. It is Yahweh proposing that the universes would have been better if the Milky Way had been placed to the left of the Canis Major Dwarf Galaxy, and that the Andromeda Galaxy should have been to the right of Leo II. It is simply incomprehensible to imagine that this is exactly what God did. As we read into the book of Galatians, what is going to become clear from the beginning of the letter to the end in chapter 6, verse 15, is that Paul understood that the Christ event was the beginning point in time when the world experienced creation, part 2. Where God recreates Himself before the cosmos and everything is changed. When we are done, the elemental structure of the universe is changed. And strangely enough, even the elemental structure of Yahweh is changed also. He is Father and Son. And we are now set in a structure where we are configured and wired into this being, this God, and a bond has been formed like a parent to a child. We are His children. He is our parent. Paul's major thesis involves a recognition on our part that God desires that we become a new creation. In fact, in Galatians 4:3-8, Paul points out that the Galatians were formerly enslaved to the elemental spirits. This translation, a poor one at best, is part of a difficult text, no doubt. This expression, elemental spirits, is the substance of what can be referred to as the fundamental elements of the universe. We would call them just elements of the periodic table. In essence, we were formerly composed of the fundamental elements of a previous cosmos, a cosmos prior to the coming of Christ, but not now. In physical science classes today, we're required to learn the periodic table of elements. This is a list of some 118 elements that everything that we know is made of. You know, I'm talking about the list that includes oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, etc. Everything is thought to be an offshoot or reconfiguration of some of these elements put together. In fact, the human body, which is mostly water, 57% or above, even up to 75% in infants. It can be thought of as mostly hydrogen and oxygen, the two components of the molecule for water. In Paul's world, there were 4 elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. Everything in the universe was thought by some to stem from these 4 elements. Paul, a typical Greco-Roman, also knew of these 4 elements, and here in this letter to Galatians, he criticizes and petitions his audience to not go back to their understanding of the cosmos, where they worshipped nature with a capital N, these 4 elements as divine. Instead, he wonders how one can go back to this 4-element structuring of the universe when the cosmos has been fundamentally changed with the coming of Christ. The universe itself is fundamentally shifted due to the Christ event. Part 6. Standing on shifting ground. When one begins to grasp this image that I am presenting, especially the one of witnessing a meteor striking the earth, and one might also begin to comprehend that what the Galatians were experiencing was probably not what one might call a comforting image. Contrary to popular opinion, God is not calling us to comfort. As much as this flies in the face of everything we experience through mass culturally sold life, such as what we get through Walmart and McDonald's, God is not calling us to an eternal Posturepedic mattress, but on the contrary is inviting us to stand in the midst of a hurricane, a spiritual hurricane, as it were, where even the ground seems to be shifting. And Paul is standing next to you saying, this is it. This is the moment we've been waiting for. We will never be the same again. This idea is nothing short of terrifying. Well, welcome to creation. If you are grasping what I am saying, then you understand that God is inviting us to witness the piercing scream of the wind of God that flew over the tornadic face of the deep and shook the cosmos when the thundering words that came out were, "Let there be light." We have been invited to take not a front row seat, but a place on the field where God is going to say, "Let there be light." And instead of witnessing the light coming out of the darkness, we are the light coming out of the darkness. This, in a manner of speaking, is what it means for God to shift from God the Creator to God the Father. To begin the spiritual journey of this book, this concept must be the centerpiece, the redefining moment, the keystone, the uniqueness of Paul's God, the apple of Yahweh's eye, and the tectonic shift of the stone in our hearts. This concept, stated plainly, is that God, through the Christ event, transmogrified himself in his own being and also in yours. End of chapter 1.